What if you woke up tomorrow and the Earth was no longer round, no curve, no horizon bending away, just a massive, endless, flat world beneath your feet? It sounds impossible, but if it happened overnight, our entire planet would fall into chaos. At first, nothing would seem unusual. The morning would begin just like any other. Alarm clocks would ring, coffee machines would hum softly in kitchens. People would scroll through their phones while the sun slowly rises outside their windows. Children would prepare for school. Workers would rush to catch buses and trains. Cities would wake up, unaware that something impossible had already happened. But somewhere, someone would notice first. Maybe a scientist working late in an observatory, maybe a satellite technician reviewing orbital data, or maybe a pilot flying high above the clouds. Because the first clues wouldn't appear on the ground, they would appear in the sky. Satellites that normally circle the Earth in smooth, predictable paths would begin behaving strangely. Their trajectories would drift. Some would begin falling toward the planet. Others would slowly move away into space. Engineers would stare at their monitors confused, because the math that normally keeps satellites in orbit would suddenly stop working. Gravity calculations would no longer make sense. At first, they might assume it's a technical error, a glitch in the system. But as more data arrives, the confusion would grow. GPS signals would start failing across different parts of the world. Navigation systems in cars would give incorrect directions. Smartphones would struggle to pinpoint locations. And airplanes flying across the ocean would begin receiving strange warnings from their navigation systems. Pilots rely on incredibly precise calculations based on the Earth's curvature. Flight paths are carefully designed to follow the curve of the planet. But now, something doesn't match the maps anymore. Air traffic control would quickly notice something unusual. Aircraft routes that normally appear as smooth arcs across the globe would begin looking wrong. Distances between cities would no longer match previous calculations. Flights that should take 8 hours might suddenly take much longer, or sometimes much less. Within a few hours, scientists across the world would begin comparing data. Satellite images, astronomical measurements, global positioning systems, weather satellite readings. At first, no one would dare say it out loud, because the conclusion would sound absurd, impossible. Yet every piece of evidence would point to the same terrifying realization. The Earth is no longer round. Overnight, the planet that has been a sphere for billions of years has somehow transformed into something completely different. A massive, flat disk. The news would spread rapidly. Television networks would interrupt regular programming. Scientists would hold emergency press conferences. Governments would scramble to understand what just happened. Social media would explode with confusion, theories, and disbelief. Some people would think it's a hoax. Others would believe it's the end of the world. But the truth would be far stranger, because humanity would suddenly be living on a planet that no longer follows the rules we've always known. And this would only be the beginning of a much bigger problem, because once the shape of the Earth changes, everything else begins to change with it.
But while scientists struggle to understand what happened, another crisis would already be unfolding. The oceans. On our normal spherical Earth, gravity pulls everything toward the planet's center. Water settles naturally into oceans and seas, spreading evenly across the curved surface of the planet. It's a quiet balance we rarely think about. But if Earth suddenly became flat overnight, that balance would begin to collapse, because gravity would no longer behave the same way. Instead of pulling water toward a round center, gravity would begin drawing everything toward the middle of the flat disk. At first, the changes would be subtle. Ships at sea might notice strange shifts in ocean currents. Water that once flowed in predictable patterns would begin moving differently. Oceanographers would study satellite images and see something alarming. The oceans are slowly drifting. Massive bodies of water would begin sliding toward the center of the planet. Not all at once, but steadily, like an invisible force is gently pulling them inward. Coastlines around the world would start changing. In some regions, the sea would begin creeping farther inland. Beaches would disappear. Low-lying cities near the water would face rising tides that never seemed to stop. Flood barriers would struggle to hold back the water. Entire communities could slowly become submerged. But in other places, the opposite would happen. As the oceans shift toward the center of the disk, some coastal regions might actually begin to dry out. Harbors could become shallow. Ships could find themselves stranded far from the shoreline. Fishing towns that once relied on the sea might suddenly watch the water retreat farther and farther away. The delicate balance of Earth's oceans would be gone. Marine life would struggle to survive. Ocean currents that regulate global temperatures would break apart. The great conveyor belts of water that distribute heat around the planet would collapse. And with them, entire climate systems could begin to fail. Storms might become more unpredictable. Hurricanes could grow stronger or change direction in ways we've never seen before. Because oceans are not just water. They are one of the most powerful systems controlling Earth's environment. Without their natural balance, weather patterns across the world would begin shifting into chaos. But even this disaster wouldn't be the most frightening part. Because sooner or later, humanity would begin asking a question that hasn't seriously crossed our minds for centuries. If Earth is flat now, then somewhere out there, there must be an edge. As scientists continue studying the oceans and gravity, another question would slowly begin to dominate every conversation. If Earth is flat now, where does it end? For centuries, humanity stopped asking that question. We learned long ago that our planet has no edge. A sphere curves endlessly in every direction. But now that certainty would be gone. Because if the planet truly became a flat disk, then somewhere out there must be a boundary, a place where the world simply stops. At first, people would search through satellite images. Space agencies would rush to analyze the outermost parts of the planet. But many satellites would already be malfunctioning due to the sudden change in gravity and orbit. So governments would begin planning something humanity hasn't attempted in generations. Expeditions. Ships would be sent toward the farthest edges of the oceans. Aircraft would fly longer and longer distances across unfamiliar skies. Explorers, scientists, and researchers would push farther than any previous journey. At first, the land would seem normal. Mountains, deserts, frozen tundras. But eventually, the terrain would begin to feel strange. The horizon would stop behaving the way it once did. Instead of gently curving away, the land would stretch endlessly in a perfectly straight line. And then one day, someone would finally see it. The edge. Not a wall. Not a cliff carved by nature. But the sudden end of the world itself. The land would simply stop. Beyond it, there would be nothing but open space. No ocean beyond the edge. No distant land. Just an enormous drop into the silent darkness of the universe. Standing near it would feel deeply unsettling. Your instincts would tell you something is wrong. Because every step closer would feel slightly heavier. Gravity would still be pulling everything toward the center of the disk. Which means near the edge, the ground would almost feel like a steep, invisible slope. Walking toward the boundary could feel like climbing a hill without realizing it. And one wrong step, one moment of lost balance, could send someone falling into the endless void below. Airplanes would avoid flying anywhere near the outer regions. Storm systems near the edge might behave unpredictably, with winds spiraling outward into space. Even the oceans drifting toward the center would leave the outermost lands dry and barren. These regions might slowly become some of the most dangerous and mysterious places on Earth. But perhaps the most unsettling part wouldn't be the edge itself. It would be what it represents. For the first time in modern history, humanity would be able to stand at the literal boundary of its world. And when you look beyond that edge, into the vast emptiness of space, the universe might suddenly feel much bigger and far more terrifying than it ever did before. But while humanity struggles to understand the oceans and the edge of the world, the most dramatic changes would begin above our heads. The sky itself would no longer behave the way it always has. Right now, the cycle of day and night feels simple. The Earth rotates like a spinning sphere. As it turns, Different parts of the planet move toward the sun and then away from it. That's why we experience sunrise, afternoon, sunset, and night. But if Earth suddenly became flat, that delicate balance would be broken, because the movement of the sun across the sky depends on a rotating globe. Without that rotation working the same way, the path of the sun would become unpredictable. Some regions of the planet might begin experiencing much longer days. The sun could remain in the sky for far more hours than usual. Cities that once enjoyed cool nights might suddenly face endless daylight. Temperatures would rise, heat would build, water would evaporate faster, and life in those regions would begin struggling to adapt. But in other places, the opposite could happen. Entire parts of the planet might be pushed into long periods of darkness. The sun might barely appear above the horizon. Days could feel like permanent twilight. Plants that rely on sunlight to grow would begin to die. Crops would fail. Forests could slowly wither. Animals that depend on natural day-night cycles would become confused. Migration patterns would break down. Birds, insects, and marine life all rely on the rhythm of sunlight to survive. Without that rhythm, entire ecosystems could begin collapsing. Weather patterns would change as well. The winds that circle our planet are guided by its rotation and shape. These winds help distribute heat across continents and oceans. But on a flat world, those patterns might behave in completely new ways. Storms could become stronger and less predictable. Hurricanes might travel in strange directions. Jet streams in the upper atmosphere could shift or disappear entirely. Some regions might experience constant storms. Others could fall into long, devastating droughts. The climate of the entire planet would begin to lose its balance. And as the sky becomes more chaotic, people would slowly realize something unsettling. The systems that keep life stable on Earth are incredibly delicate. They depend on gravity, on rotation, on the precise shape of our planet. Change just one of these things, and the entire world begins to unravel. But perhaps the most profound change wouldn't be in the oceans, or the sky, or even the shape of the planet itself. The biggest change would happen inside the human mind. Because when the world you've always known suddenly stops following its own rules, you begin to question everything. But perhaps the most profound change wouldn't happen in the oceans, or the sky, or even at the edge of the world. It would happen inside the human mind. For thousands of years, humanity has shared one quiet certainty. We live on a small sphere, floating through an unimaginably vast universe. That simple idea shaped everything. Science, exploration. It helped us understand our place in the cosmos. But if Earth suddenly became flat overnight, that certainty would disappear. People would begin questioning everything they thought they understood. If the shape of our planet can change in a single night, what else about reality could change? Would the laws of physics still be reliable? Could gravity suddenly behave differently tomorrow? Is the universe as stable as we believe it is? Or are we simply lucky that it has behaved the same way for so long? The world would suddenly feel far less predictable, and far more mysterious. But here's an even more interesting question. If you woke up tomorrow and discovered the Earth had become flat, what would you do first? Would you try to see the edge of the world? Would you stay where you are and wait for answers? Or would you simply look at the sky and wonder what else in the universe might still be unknown? Take a moment and think about it, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if the Earth became flat overnight? If this video made you think a little differently about our planet and the universe around us, make sure to like the video. And if you know someone who loves strange thought experiments like this one, share it with them. And if you enjoy exploring questions that make you look at reality in a completely new way, consider subscribing to the channel. Because there are many more fascinating questions about our world and the human mind that we haven't explored yet. Sometimes the most ordinary things, like the round shape of our planet, are actually the reason life works at all.